The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace above New Haven like the wrath of an angry god. 400 warships appeared in the space around Kepler 442c in perfect formation, their weapons already charging and their targeting systems locked onto every Vorthak vessel in the system. Admiral Sam Patterson stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution and felt a cold satisfaction as he watched the enemy positions appear on his tactical displays. The Vorthak had 60 ships in orbit around the planet, and their biovessels looked exactly like the nightmares described in Dr. Lisa Carter's emergency transmission. Today those nightmares were going to die. All ships commence firing, Admiral Patterson ordered calmly. Show no mercy. The space around New Haven exploded into the largest battle in human history. Hundreds of human warships opened fire simultaneously, sending streams of energy beams, missile salvos, and electromagnetic pulse weapons toward the Vorthak fleet. The aliens had been caught completely by surprise, and their bioships began dying before they could even power up their weapons. Captain Roy Henderson watched through the viewports of the UNS Vengeance as Vorthak vessels exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Each alien ship that died helped heal the wound in his heart left by the murder of his family. This was what justice looked like when humanity finally decided to stop being patient and diplomatic. Target the large bioship on the far side of the planet, Captain Henderson ordered his weapons officer. That looks like their command vessel. The UNS Vengeance fired its main guns, and the massive Vorthak command ship split apart like a rotten fruit. Alien crew members were sucked out into the vacuum of space where they died just as horribly as the human colonists they had tortured. Down on the surface of New Haven, the surviving colonists huddled in their underground tunnels as the sounds of the space battle reached them through the planet's crust. The explosions were so massive that they shook the ground like earthquakes, and debris from destroyed ships began falling from the sky like burning rain. Pete Johnson felt his heart jump with hope as he recognized the sound of human weapons firing. After nearly 2 years of hiding and waiting, someone had finally come to rescue them. "That's human plasma cannon fire," he told the other survivors. "Our people are here." Sarah Foster held her children close as the tunnel shook around them. Amy and Chris were scared by the loud noises, but Sarah felt tears of joy running down her face. "It's okay, babies," she whispered. "The good guys are here. We're going to be safe." Dr. Lisa Carter was in her makeshift laboratory when the battle began, still working on the electromagnetic shielding devices even though rescue seemed to be arriving. The scientist in her was fascinated by what she could hear happening above them. The human fleet was using weapons that she had never heard before, technologies that must have been developed specifically for fighting alien bioships. The Vorthak ground forces were in complete chaos as their orbital support disappeared in a storm of human firepower. The alien creatures ran between their organic buildings like insects whose nest had been kicked, trying to coordinate a defense that was already hopeless. Admiral Patterson watched the tactical display as the last Vorthak ships in orbit were destroyed or disabled. The entire enemy fleet had been eliminated in less than 30 minutes, but the Admiral felt no satisfaction yet. The real work was just beginning. "Colonel Williams, you are cleared for ground assault," Admiral Patterson announced over the communication system. "Find our people and bring them home." Marine Colonel Beth Williams led the largest ground assault in human military history. Hundreds of dropships launched from the human fleet, carrying 10,000 Marines armed with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built. The electromagnetic pulse rifles that Dr. Carter had theorized about in her research notes had become reality, and they were specifically designed to destroy Vorthak biotechnology. "Remember, our people have been hiding underground for almost 2 years," Colonel Williams told her Marines as their dropships approached the planet's surface. "They're going to be scared and probably sick. Treat them gently, but don't hesitate to kill anything that threatens them." The first wave of human Marines landed near the main Vorthak base and immediately began their systematic extermination of every alien they could find. The electromagnetic weapons were devastatingly effective against the bioships and organic structures that the Vorthak had built. Alien installations that had seemed indestructible began dissolving like they were made of paper. Sergeant Mike Davis led his squad through the ruins of New Haven's main colony area, searching for any signs of human survivors. The sight of the destroyed homes and schools filled him with rage. These had been families, children, people who had never hurt anyone in their lives. "Sergeant, we've got movement in that Vorthak structure over there," called Corporal Lisa Martinez, pointing toward one of the alien bio-buildings. Sergeant Davis and his squad approached the organic structure carefully. As they got closer, they could hear sounds that made their blood boil with fury. There were human voices inside, weak and pleading for help. The Vorthak were still keeping prisoners alive for their experiments. "Breach it," Sergeant Davis ordered. The Marines used their electromagnetic weapons to dissolve a hole in the biostructure's wall. Inside, they found 12 human prisoners who had been kept alive by the Vorthak for nearly 2 years of torture and experimentation. The condition of these people was beyond anything the Marines had been prepared for. "Medical team to Sector 7 immediately," Sergeant Davis called over his radio. "We need emergency treatment for multiple survivors with severe injuries and possible biological modifications." Dr. Kevin Barnes and his medical teams were already working frantically to treat the survivors they had found. The condition of the people who had been kept prisoner by the Vorthak was worse than any nightmare the doctors had imagined. But these humans were alive, and that meant there was hope. Meanwhile, other Marine units were systematically searching every possible hiding place for additional survivors. They used ground-penetrating sensors and acoustic equipment to look for signs of human life underground. Lieutenant Tom Wilson was leading a search team through the abandoned mining complex when his sensors detected faint life signs deep underground. "This is Wilson. I'm getting multiple human readings from the deep mining tunnels in Sector 12. Looks like a large group." Pete Johnson heard the footsteps above them and grabbed his weapon, ready to fight one last battle if the Vorthak had found their hiding place. But then he heard something that made him drop his gun and fall to his knees with relief. "Hello down there. This is Lieutenant Wilson of the Colonial Marines. Are there any humans in those tunnels?" Pete's voice shook as he called back. "Yes, we're here. There are 127 of us down here." The rescue of the New Haven survivors became the most emotional moment in military history, when the Marines finally reached the deep tunnels where Pete Johnson had kept his people alive for almost 2 years. Hardened soldiers began crying at the sight of the children who had survived in the darkness. Amy Foster ran toward the first Marine she saw and threw her arms around his legs. "Are you here to take us home?" she asked. The Marine, a tough veteran named Sergeant Paul Garcia, knelt down to Amy's level. "Yes, sweetheart. We're here to take you home. You're safe now." Sarah, Foster could not stop crying as she watched her children see sunlight for the first time in 2 years. Chris was so weak that a Marine medic had to carry him, but he was smiling for the first time since the attack. Dr. Lisa Carter was amazed when she met the Marine science officer who had been sent to debrief her. The electromagnetic weapons that humanity had developed were based on research that had begun with her emergency transmission about Vorthak vulnerabilities. "Your message saved thousands of lives," the science officer told Lisa. "The weapons we use today were built using your theories about biotechnology weaknesses. You helped us turn your tragedy into their defeat." Colonel Beth Williams made sure that every single Vorthak on the planet was eliminated before she declared the surface secure. The Marines showed no mercy to the aliens who had tortured human civilians, and by the end of the day, not one Vorthak remained alive on New Haven. Admiral Patterson stood in the ruins of the main colony and watched as the survivors were brought to the surface. These people had endured almost 2 years of hell, but they had never given up hope. Their survival was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. "Pete Johnson," Admiral Patterson said as he met the security chief who had kept so many people alive. "Your actions here will be remembered forever. You saved these people through courage and sacrifice that goes beyond duty." Pete was too overwhelmed to speak. He had spent 2 years thinking that the universe had forgotten about New Haven, but humanity had come with the largest military force in history to rescue 127 survivors. It was proof that humans never abandoned their own. The medical evacuation of the survivors took several days. Dr. Kevin Barnes worked around the clock to treat malnutrition, psychological trauma, and the various injuries that people had sustained during their long ordeal underground. The children required special care, but all of them would recover. Mrs. Nancy Bell was reunited with her teaching materials when Marines found them in the ruins of the education dome. The veteran teacher was already making plans to help the children readjust to normal life once they reached safety. "These kids have been through more than most adults ever face," Mrs. Bell told Dr. Barnes. "But they're strong. They survived because they never stopped believing that someone would come for them." Admiral Patterson used New Haven as the staging area for a series of devastating attacks on Vorthak worlds throughout the galaxy. The species that had terrorized human colonies for decades suddenly found themselves facing an enemy that would not negotiate, would not show mercy, and would not stop until every Vorthak world was reduced to ash. The electromagnetic weapons developed from Dr. Carter's research proved to be the key to defeating the Vorthak completely. Within 6 months, the alien species that had once seemed invincible was extinct, wiped out by human forces that had been motivated by the suffering of innocence. Captain Roy Henderson got his revenge for his murdered family. The UNS Vengeance participated in the destruction of the Vorthak homeworld, and Roy felt a sense of peace that he had not known since losing his wife and children. The galaxy learned a fundamental lesson from the New Haven rescue and the subsequent war against the Vorthak. Humanity might seem peaceful and diplomatic most of the time, but when their civilians were threatened, they became something far more dangerous than any alien species had imagined. New Haven was rebuilt as a memorial world, where the survivors could live in peace while remembering those who had died. Pete Johnson became the planetary administrator, and Dr. Lisa Carter established a research institute dedicated to developing defenses against hostile alien species. Amy Foster grew up to become a colonial marine officer, inspired by the soldiers who had rescued her from the darkness. Chris Foster became a teacher like Mrs. Bell, helping other children learn about courage and hope in difficult times. The monument at the center of New Haven bore a simple inscription: "Here stands proof that humanity never forgets its own, and never forgives those who hurt them. We are not alone in the darkness because we are never alone when we stand together." Sarah Foster brought her children to visit the monument every year on the anniversary of their rescue. "Remember this," she would tell Amy and Chris. "Remember that no matter how dark things get, your people will always come for you. That's what it means to be human." The story of New Haven became legend throughout human space. It was proof that even when humans seemed helpless and alone in the vast darkness of the galaxy, they possessed something that no enemy could defeat: an unbreakable bond with each other, and an unlimited capacity for both protection and vengeance. The universe had learned that humanity could be the kindest and most compassionate species in the galaxy, but they could also be the most terrifying when someone threatened their family. The Vorthak had discovered this truth too late to save themselves, but their destruction served as a warning to every other species among the stars. Never attack human civilians, because if you do, humanity will come for you, and hell follows with them. Admiral Sam Patterson stood in the communications center of Fleet Command Station Alpha, reading the emergency transmission that had taken 18 months to reach human space. The message was fragmented and filled with static, but the content was clear enough to make his blood run cold with rage. "How certain are we about this information?" Admiral Patterson asked the communication technician who had decoded the signal. "Lieutenant." Commander Nancy Wright checked her data one more time before responding. "The encryption codes are authentic, sir. This message definitely came from Dr. Lisa Carter on New Haven. The timestamp shows it was sent during an active attack on the colony." Admiral Patterson had been fighting alien threats for 23 years, but nothing had prepared him for the systematic brutality described in Dr. Carter's transmission. The Vorthak were not just another hostile species trying to expand their territory. They were genocidal monsters who enjoyed torturing and experimenting on humans before killing them. "Get me a direct line to Central Command," Admiral Patterson ordered, "and start sending emergency signals to every fleet commander in this sector. We're going to New Haven, and we're going with everything we have." Within 6 hours, Admiral Patterson had assembled the largest human military force in the history of space warfare. Over 400 ships from 17 different fleets converged on the staging area near the Proxima Centauri system. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, marine assault vessels, and support ships filled the space around Fleet Command Station Alpha like a metal storm cloud. The flagship of this massive armada was the UNS Retribution, a massive dreadnought that carried enough firepower to destroy an entire planet. Admiral Patterson had chosen the ship's name carefully. This was not going to be a rescue mission or a diplomatic encounter. This was going to be an act of vengeance that would send a message to every hostile alien species in the galaxy. Captain Roy Henderson commanded the heavy cruiser UNS Vengeance, which had been named after his home colony of Vengeance Point. The Vorthak had destroyed Captain Henderson's world 3 years earlier, killing his wife and 2 children along with 40,000 other colonists. For Roy Henderson, the mission to New Haven was personal. "All ships, this is Admiral Patterson," came the voice over the fleet communication system. "In 18 hours we will jump to the New Haven system. Our mission is simple: destroy every Vorthak ship and ground installation in that system, and rescue any human survivors we can find." The Admiral paused for a moment before continuing. "I want to be clear about something. We are not going to New Haven to negotiate or to show mercy. We are going there to demonstrate what happens when someone attacks human civilians. When we are finished, the Vorthak will understand that humanity does not forget, and humanity does not forgive." Marine Colonel Beth Williams was preparing her ground assault forces aboard the troop transport UNS Thunder. Beth had been fighting alien threats for 15 years, and she had developed specialized tactics for dealing with hostile species like the Vorthak. Her Marines were equipped with the latest weapons and armor, including new electromagnetic pulse rifles that had been designed specifically for fighting bio-based alien technology. "Listen up, Marines," Colonel Williams addressed her troops over the ship's communication system. "The Vorthak have been torturing and experimenting on human civilians for nearly 2 years. Some of those people might still be alive, and our job is to get them out and make sure the aliens never hurt anyone again." The Marines checked their equipment one final time as they prepared for what would be the largest military operation in human history. Each soldier carried enough ammunition and supplies for extended combat operations, and they had trained extensively for fighting in the enclosed spaces where human survivors might be hiding. Dr. Kevin Barnes was aboard the medical ship UNS Mercy, preparing field hospitals and trauma treatment facilities for the survivors they hoped to rescue. As the fleet's chief medical officer, Dr. Barnes had seen the reports about Vorthak biological experiments, and he was prepared for the worst. His medical teams had studied every piece of information available about alien torture methods and were ready to treat injuries that no human doctor had ever seen before. "We don't know what condition the survivors will be in," Dr. Barnes told his medical staff. "Some of them may have been prisoners for almost 2 years. Be prepared for severe malnutrition, psychological trauma, and possibly biological modifications that we've never encountered before." The jump to hyperspace was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 400 human warships disappeared from normal space in a coordinated flash of light that could be detected by sensors across 3 star systems. The largest fleet in human history was traveling at maximum speed toward New Haven, carrying with it the combined fury of an entire species. Back on New Haven, Pete Johnson was leading the most dangerous supply mission the survivors had ever attempted. Dr. Lisa Carter needed specific materials from the main research laboratory to complete her work on the electromagnetic shielding devices that might protect them from Vorthak sensors. "Remember, we get in fast and get out faster," Pete told his team of 6 volunteers as they prepared to leave the safety of the deep tunnels. "The lab complex is only 200 meters from the main Vorthak base, so we'll have maybe 10 minutes before they detect us." Gary Cooper carried the heavy cutting tools they would need to break into the sealed laboratory building. Tony Walsh had volunteered to carry the materials they hoped to find, and 4 other survivors rounded out the team. Each person knew that this mission had little chance of success, but they also knew that without Lisa's shielding technology, they would all die in the tunnels eventually. The team made their way through the abandoned mining tunnels toward the surface access point closest to the research complex. It was the first time any of them had been this close to the surface in 3 months, and they could smell the strange alien odors that came from the Vorthak installations above ground. "The air smells wrong," whispered Janet Davis, one of the former security officers who had volunteered for the mission. "It's like chemicals and rotting meat mixed together." Pete nodded grimly. The Vorthak had changed the very atmosphere around their base, filling it with gases that were probably poisonous to humans. They would have to work fast and get back underground before the alien chemicals made them sick. Meanwhile, in the deep tunnels, Sarah Foster was trying to keep her children calm during another Vorthak patrol that was searching the area above them. Amy and Chris had learned to stay completely silent during these times, but Sarah could see the fear in their eyes growing stronger every day. "How much longer, Mommy?" Chris whispered so quietly that Sarah could barely hear him. "Soon, baby," Sarah replied, though she had stopped believing her own words months ago. "Someone will come for us soon." But even as Sarah tried to comfort her children, she was losing hope. The survivors had been waiting for rescue for nearly 2 years, and no help had come. The food was almost gone. People were getting sick from the bad air in the tunnels, and the Vorthak were getting closer to finding them every day. Mrs. Nancy Bell was also struggling with despair as she tried to maintain some kind of education program for the children. The former school teacher had always believed that knowledge and hope could overcome any obstacle, but living in the tunnels was destroying her faith in the future. "Today we're going to learn about the history of human space exploration," Mrs. Bell said to the handful of children who still attended her classes. But even as she spoke, she wondered if there would be any human space exploration left for these children to be part of. Amy Foster raised her hand. "Mrs. Bell, do you really think someone is going to come and save us?" The question hit Mrs. Bell like a physical blow. She looked at the 8-year-old girl who had once been full of curiosity and joy, and she saw only exhaustion and fear. "Yes, Amy," Mrs. Bell said firmly. "I believe that someone will come." But even as she said the words, Mrs. Bell was not sure she believed them anymore. Above ground, Pete Johnson's supply team had reached the research laboratory and was working frantically to gather the materials that Dr. Lisa Carter needed. The building had been abandoned since the Vorthak attack, and most of the equipment was still intact. "I found the electromagnetic field generators," Gary Cooper called quietly to the rest of the team. "And there's a whole cabinet full of the rare earth metals that Lisa wanted." Pete kept watch at the laboratory entrance while his team loaded their backpacks with everything they could carry. Through the windows he could see the alien base in the distance, with its strange organic buildings that pulsed with green light. Occasionally he could see Vorthak creatures moving between the structures, but so far they had not noticed the human activity at the laboratory. "2 more minutes," Pete whispered to his team. "Then we're out of here." But as they prepared to leave, the team heard a sound that made their blood freeze. It was the high-pitched screaming noise that Vorthak patrol ships made when they were moving at high speed. The aliens had detected something and were coming to investigate. "Run!" Pete shouted as the alien patrol ship appeared over the laboratory building. The supply team scattered in different directions, each person carrying part of the materials that Lisa needed for her research. Pete and Gary Cooper made it back to the tunnel entrance, but Tony Walsh was caught in the open when the Vorthak ship opened fire. Tony's last act was to throw his backpack full of research materials to Gary before the alien energy beam killed him. The sacrifice meant that Lisa would have most of what she needed to complete her shielding project, but it also meant that another good person had died trying to protect the survivors. In the hyperspace between star systems, Admiral Patterson's massive fleet was approaching the New Haven system at maximum speed. The Admiral stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, watching the countdown timer that showed less than 2 hours until they reached their destination. "Admiral, we're receiving updated intelligence from our scout ships," reported Captain Jennifer Stone, the fleet's intelligence officer. "The Vorthak have established a major base on New Haven's surface. We count at least 60 alien ships in orbit and extensive ground installations." Admiral Patterson smiled grimly. "Good. The more of them we find in one place, the easier it will be to destroy them all." The Admiral activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All ships prepare for combat operations. When we drop out of hyperspace, we will immediately engage all Vorthak forces. Remember, our primary mission is to rescue human survivors, but we will not accept the surrender of any alien forces. This is a war of extermination." Captain Roy Henderson felt his heart rate increase as he prepared his ship for battle. After 3 years of mourning his dead family, He was finally going to have his revenge against the creatures that had destroyed his world. Colonel Beth Williams was briefing her Marines one final time before the assault. The survivors have been hiding underground for almost 2 years. They're going to be scared, malnourished, and probably traumatized. But they're also going to be the toughest humans you've ever met, because they've survived this long against impossible odds. Dr. Kevin Barnes and his medical teams were standing by in the hospital ships, ready to treat whatever conditions they found among the survivors. The doctor had dedicated his life to healing people, but today, he also hoped to see the Vorthek pay for what they had done to innocent humans. As the massive human fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace above New Haven, none of the participants knew that they were about to engage in the most decisive battle in the history of human space warfare. The outcome of this fight would determine not just the fate of the New Haven survivors, but the future relationship between humanity and every other intelligent species in the galaxy. The Vorthak were about to learn that attacking human civilians came with a price that no alien species had ever imagined possible. 6 months had passed since the Vorthak attacked New Haven, and the 287 surviving colonists lived like ghosts in the deep mining tunnels beneath their former home. What had once been a thriving community was now a desperate struggle for survival in the darkness underground. Pete Johnson stood at the entrance to Tunnel 7, listening carefully for any sounds that might indicate Vorthak patrol activity above them. His left arm hung useless at his side, damaged during the final battle for the colony, but he had refused to let his injury stop him from protecting the remaining civilians. The security chief had become the unofficial leader of the survivors, though leadership in their current situation meant making impossible choices about who got food and who went on dangerous supply runs. "Any movement up there?" asked Gary Cooper, who had become Pete's second in command. Gary had been a miner before the attack, but the Vorthak invasion had turned everyone into soldiers whether they wanted to be or not. Pete shook his head. Nothing. For the past hour. The aliens seemed to be concentrating their patrols around the main dome areas today. This might be our best chance to reach the emergency supply cache in Section 12. The survivors had been living off stored food and water from the mining operations' emergency supplies, but those resources were running dangerously low. Every few days, small teams had to venture closer to the surface to gather supplies from the abandoned parts of the colony. It was extremely dangerous work, and they had already lost 17 people to Vorthak hunting parties. In the deepest part of the tunnel system, Sarah Foster sat with her 2 children in what used to be a mining equipment storage room. Amy and Chris had grown thin and pale during their months underground, and Sarah could see the fear in their eyes that never went away. The children no longer asked when they could go home because they had learned that home no longer existed. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Chris whispered. He was only 5 years old, and the constant hunger and fear were too much for such a young child to understand. Sarah looked at the small piece of protein bar that was supposed to be Chris's breakfast. The food rations kept getting smaller as their supplies ran out, and she knew that her son needed more nutrition than they could provide. She broke off half of her own food ration and gave it to him. "Here, baby. Eat this too." Amy watched her mother give away her food and felt guilty for being hungry herself. At 8 years old, she was starting to understand how bad their situation really was. She had overheard the adults talking about food running out and people getting sick from the poor conditions in the tunnels. "Mom, are the bad monsters ever going to go away?" Amy asked quietly. Sarah hugged her daughter close. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we have to keep hoping that someone will come to help us." Dr. Lisa Carter had survived the attack on the mining complex, though she had been badly injured when the Vorthak found her and Jake Morrison. Jake had died protecting her, giving Lisa time to escape through a maintenance tunnel that the aliens had not discovered. She still felt guilty about surviving when so many others had died, including the man who had tried to save her life. Lisa spent most of her time in a makeshift laboratory she had set up in one of the mining tunnels. Using salvaged equipment and parts from broken mining tools, she continued to study the Vorthak technology and biology. Every piece of information she could gather might be useful if rescue ever came, or if the survivors ever had a chance to fight back. "I've figured out something important," Lisa told Pete as she showed him her latest research notes. The Vorthak use biosensors to track us. They can detect our body heat, heartbeat, and brain activity from a considerable distance. That's how they keep finding our people when they go to the surface. Pete looked at the crude diagrams Lisa had drawn showing the alien tracking systems. Is there any way to block their sensors? Maybe, Lisa said. I've been working with some of the metallic compounds we mine here. If we can create a kind of shielding material, it might hide our life signs from their scanners. But I need more. Time to test it, and I need materials that are still up in the colony. Pete nodded grimly. I'll put together a team for another supply run. What exactly do you need? Lisa gave him a list of electronic components and chemical compounds that she hoped to find in the abandoned laboratories above ground. It would be one of the most dangerous missions yet. But if her shielding idea worked, it could save lives. The Vorthak had not been idle during the 6 months since their victory. The aliens had established a permanent base on the surface of New Haven, using the planet as a staging area for attacks on other human settlements. They had built strange organic structures that looked like giant hives or cocoons, and these buildings pulsed with an eerie green light that could be seen from the tunnel entrances. The most horrifying discovery had come 3 months after the invasion, when a scouting team led by Gary Cooper found evidence of what the Vorthak were doing to captured humans. In one of the abandoned medical facilities, they discovered laboratories where the aliens had been conducting experiments on human prisoners. Gary had barely been able to describe what he saw to Pete and the other leaders. The Vorthak were studying human biology and psychology, trying to understand how human minds worked and how human bodies could be modified for their purposes. The aliens seemed to be using humans as test subjects for new types of biological weapons. We found holding cells, Gary had reported with horror in his voice. There were at least 20 people being kept alive for experiments. Dr. Martinez from the medical center was one of them, but what they had done to him... Gary couldn't finish the sentence. The discovery had made everyone understand that capture by the Vorthak was a fate worse than death. The aliens were not just conquerors, they were torturers who enjoyed causing suffering to other intelligent species. Tony Walsh, who had been the head of the mining operation, now served as the group's logistics coordinator. He kept track of their dwindling supplies and tried to plan for their long-term survival, though he knew that without outside help, they could not last much longer. We have food for maybe 6 more weeks if we cut the rations again, Tony reported to Pete during one of their daily leadership meetings. Water is not a problem because the underground streams are still clean, but we're running out of medical supplies and the air recycling equipment is starting to fail. The survivors had been breathing recycled air through the mining operation's life support systems, but those systems were designed for short-term use during mining operations, not for permanently housing hundreds of people. The air was getting stale and unhealthy, and several people had developed respiratory problems. What about the children? Pete asked. How are they holding up? Tony's expression grew even more grim. Not well. They're not getting enough nutrition for growing bodies, and the psychological stress is affecting all of them. Mrs. Bell has been trying to keep up some kind of school routine, but it's hard to teach kids about hope and the future when we're all living like this. Nancy Bell, the former school teacher, had indeed been trying to maintain some normalcy for the children. In a section of the tunnels that they had converted into a classroom, she gathered the kids each day to continue their education. But it was heartbreaking work, watching bright young minds slowly losing their curiosity and joy. Amy Foster was one of Mrs. Bell's most dedicated students, though the 8-year-old had changed dramatically during their months underground. She no longer smiled or laughed like she used to, and she had developed a nervous habit of constantly looking over her shoulder for danger. Today we're going to learn about the stars, Mrs. Bell said to the group of 12 children who attended her classes. Can anyone remember what we learned about navigation using stellar positions? Amy raised her hand slowly. The stars can help us find our way home, she said in a quiet voice. But we don't have a home anymore. Mrs. Bell felt her heart break a little more. Amy, home is not just a place. Home is being with the people who love you. As long as we're together, we still have a home. But even Mrs. Bell was starting to lose hope. She had been an optimistic person her entire life, But 6 months of living in fear and watching children suffer was wearing away her faith that things would ever get better. The Vorthak hunting parties had become more aggressive in recent weeks. The aliens seemed to know that humans were still hiding somewhere in the area, and they were conducting systematic searches of every possible hiding place. 3 times in the past month, Vorthak scouts had come close to discovering the tunnel entrances that led to the survivors' hiding place. During one terrifying incident, a group of aliens had spent an entire day searching the mining complex directly above where the humans were hiding. The survivors had huddled in absolute silence for 18 hours, afraid that even the slightest sound might give away their location. "They're getting smarter," Pete told his inner circle of advisors. "They're learning our patterns and figuring out where we might be hiding. We need to change our tactics or they're going to find us eventually." Gary Cooper had an idea that might help, though it was extremely risky. "What if we tried to capture one of their scouts? Dr. Carter might be able to learn something useful from studying their technology up close." Lisa's eyes lit up with scientific curiosity, but Pete shook his head immediately. "Too dangerous. If we attack one of their patrols and fail to capture it, they'll know exactly where we are. We can't take that kind of risk." "But we can't just keep hiding forever," Gary argued. "Our supplies are running out and people are getting sick. If we don't do something soon, we're all going to die down here anyway." Pete knew Gary was right, but he also knew that any aggressive action could doom the remaining survivors. As their leader, he had to balance the need for action against the responsibility of keeping people alive. It was an impossible situation, with no good choices. Meanwhile, the psychological toll of their situation was becoming harder to ignore. Several adults had suffered mental breakdowns from the constant stress and fear. 2 people had tried to leave the tunnels and surrender to the Vorthak, rather than continue living in the underground hell, and they had to be physically restrained by their friends. "We need to talk about morale," Tony Walsh said during one of their leadership meetings. "People are losing hope, and when people lose hope, they start making desperate decisions that put everyone at risk." Lisa had been thinking about the same problem. What if we could give them something to work toward? Some kind of project that would make them feel like we're not just waiting to die? "Like what?" Pete asked. "My shielding research," Lisa replied. "If we could get the materials I need and actually build working camouflage devices, it would give people hope that we might be able to fight back someday. Even if rescue never comes, maybe we could find a way to strike back at the aliens who destroyed our home." Pete considered the idea. A successful raid to gather materials for Lisa's research would be extremely dangerous, but it might be worth the risk if it could restore some hope to the survivors. And if Lisa's shielding technology actually worked, it could change their entire situation. "All right," Pete decided. "We'll plan one more major supply run, but this time we're going to target the main laboratory complex where the best equipment is stored. It's the most dangerous area because it's closest to the Vorthak base, but if we can pull it off, we might get everything Lisa needs." As Pete began planning what might be their most important mission yet, none of the survivors knew that far across the galaxy, Dr. Lisa Carter's emergency transmission was finally reaching human space. The message had traveled for months through the vast distances between stars, but it was about to arrive at a military listening post where it would change everything. Help was coming to New Haven, though it would arrive in a form that the Vorthak could never expect or prepare for. Humanity had received word of what happened to their people, and they were not pleased. The attack came without warning in the early hours of morning, when most of the colonists were still asleep. Kate Phillips was working the night shift in the communication center, still trying to fix the problems with their long-range transmitters, when every alarm in the colony began screaming at once. Kate looked at her screens in horror as massive shapes appeared on the orbital sensors. Ships were dropping out of hyperspace around Kepler 442c, but they were unlike anything in the human databases. The vessels were huge and organic-looking, like giant insects or sea creatures floating in the darkness of space. There were dozens of them, and they were all moving toward New Haven. Jake, wake up," Kate shouted into her communicator. "We have incoming ships, multiple contacts, unknown design." Jake Morrison jerked awake in his quarters and grabbed his communicator. "Kate, what's happening? Are they responding to our signals?" "No response to any communication attempts," Kate replied, her voice shaking with fear. "Jake, these ships, they don't look human. I think they're alien." Jake felt his blood turn cold. In 3 years of running the colony, this was his worst nightmare coming true. He jumped out of bed and started putting on his clothes as fast as he could. "Sound the colony-wide alarm. Get everyone to the emergency shelters. I'm on my way to the command center." Throughout New Haven, the loud warning sirens woke up every person in the colony. Families stumbled out of their beds, confused and frightened by the terrible sound that they had only heard during emergency drills. Parents grabbed their children and began following the practiced evacuation routes to the underground shelters. Amy, Foster woke up crying as her mother Sarah shook her gently. "Amy, honey, we need to go to the safe place right now. Get Chris and follow me." 8-year-old Amy was scared, but tried to be brave for her little brother. She took Chris by the hand and followed their mother through the corridors of their dome home. Other families were doing the same thing, and soon the hallways were full of people carrying emergency bags and moving toward the shelter entrances. Pete Johnson was already in the security center when Jake arrived. Pete's face was grim as he watched the displays showing the alien ships getting closer to the planet. As the colony's security chief, Pete had always known that this day might come, but he had hoped it never would. "How many ships?" Jake asked as he looked at the screens. "At least 40 that we can count," Pete replied. "Maybe more. They're jamming our sensors now, so it's hard to get exact numbers. Jake, our defenses won't be able to stop something like this." New Haven's defenses were designed to handle small problems like pirates or raiders, not a full alien invasion. They had 12 automated defense turrets around the colony perimeter, and Pete's small security team with basic weapons. Against dozens of alien warships, they might as well have been throwing rocks. "What about the planetary defense grid?" Jake asked desperately. Pete shook his head. "The nearest defense station is 3 systems away. Even if we could get a message through this jamming, it would take them days to respond. We're on our own." Dr. Lisa Carter ran into the command center still wearing her pajamas. She had been working late in her laboratory when the alarms went off, and she was carrying a data pad with her research notes about the strange energy readings. "Jake, I think I know what's happening," Lisa said breathlessly. "Those energy readings we detected, underground, I think they were some kind of beacon. The aliens might have been tracking it." Before Jake could respond, the lights in the command center flickered and went out. Emergency power came on a few seconds later, but many of the computer systems were dead. Through the windows, they could see strange blue energy beams coming down from the sky, hitting the colony's power plants and communication arrays. "They're disabling our technology," Pete said grimly. "This is a planned attack. They know exactly what they're doing." Kate's voice came over the emergency communicator system. All stations. The alien ships are deploying some kind of energy dampening field. Most of our equipment is shutting down. I'm losing contact with the outer settlements." The alien fleet had surrounded the planet and was using advanced technology to disable human systems. The energy dampening field made most human electronics stop working, leaving the colonists almost defenseless. Only the most basic equipment continued to function, and even that was unreliable. Outside the colony domes, the first alien landing craft began touching down on the surface of New Haven. The ships were as organic-looking as the vessels in orbit, resembling giant beetles or spiders more than traditional aircraft. When the doors opened, the creatures that emerged were the stuff of nightmares. The Vorthak were tall insectoid beings that stood nearly 8 feet high on multiple legs. Their bodies were covered in a hard, dark shell that looked like armor, and they had several arms ending in claws that dripped with acid. Their heads were elongated and eyeless, but covered with sensory organs that could detect heat, movement, and the electrical activity of living brains. The aliens moved with frightening speed and coordination as they spread out from their landing sites. They carried weapons that looked like living creatures themselves, organic guns that fired bursts of energy or clouds of toxic gas. The Vorthak showed no interest in communication or negotiation. They had come to New Haven for one purpose: to eliminate every human on the planet. Pete Johnson gathered his security team at the main armory. His 12 officers looked scared but determined as they checked their weapons and body armor. They all knew that they were facing impossible odds, but they had sworn to protect the colonists, and they would not abandon their duty. "Listen up, everyone," Pete said to his team. "We can't stop these things, but we can slow them down. Our job is to buy time for the civilians to get to the deep shelters, make every shot count, and don't let them break through to the family areas." Security Officer Mark Thompson was a former Marine who had seen combat before coming to New Haven. Even with his military experience, he felt his hands shaking as he loaded ammunition into his rifle. "Pete, what are these things? Have you ever seen anything like them?" "No," Pete replied honestly. "But they bleed, which means we can kill them. That's all we need to know right now." The first Vorthak reached the outer perimeter of the colony, just as the sun was rising. The alien creatures ignored the automated defense turrets, which had been disabled by the energy-dampening field, and moved directly toward the dome buildings, where the humans lived. Pete and his team took positions behind barricades they had built around the main plaza. When the first group of Vorthak came into view, Pete gave the order to open fire. The security officers' rifles cracked in the morning air, and several of the alien creatures stumbled and fell. But for every Vorthak that went down, 2 more appeared to take its place. The aliens returned fire with their organic weapons, sending bursts of energy that melted through concrete and metal. Mark Thompson screamed as an acid projectile hit his left arm, eating through his armor and burning his flesh. "Fall back to the secondary positions," Pete shouted as more Vorthak poured into the colony. "Keep them away from the shelter entrances." In the underground tunnels beneath New Haven, hundreds of colonists huddled together in the emergency shelters. The tunnels had been built as storage areas and emergency refuges, but they were never designed to hold the entire population of the colony for an extended period. Sarah Foster held her 2 children close as explosions shook the ground above them. Amy and Chris were both crying, and Sarah was trying hard not to cry herself. Around them, other families were doing the same thing, parents comforting their children while hiding their own terror. "Mommy, when can we go home?" Chris asked in a small voice. Sarah didn't know how to answer. She could hear the sounds of fighting getting closer to the shelter entrances, and she was starting to realize that they might never see their home again. "Soon, baby," she lied. Soon. Jake Morrison was still in the command center with Lisa Carter, trying to coordinate the evacuation and the defense of the colony. Most of their communication equipment was down, but they could still talk to some of the security teams through short-range radios. "Pete, what's your status?" Jake called into his radio. Pete's voice came back full of static and the sound of gunfire. "We've lost the outer perimeter. The aliens are inside the colony now. We're falling back to the inner defensive line, but we won't be able to hold them for long." Jake looked at Lisa, and she could see the desperation in his eyes. As colony administrator, he was responsible for the lives of nearly 3,000 people, and he was watching his world fall apart around him. "Lisa, is there any way to get a message out?" Jake asked. "Some kind of emergency beacon that might get through their jamming." Lisa thought quickly about the equipment in her laboratory. Most of it was sophisticated electronics that had been disabled by the alien energy field. But there might be something simpler that could still work. "The mining equipment," she said suddenly. "Some of the deep mining gear uses quantum transmitters for communication through rock and metal. If we can get to the mining complex, we might be able to send out a distress signal." Jake nodded. "It's worth a try. We need to let someone know what happened here." They left the command center and made their way through the colony's service tunnels toward the mining facility. Above them, they could hear the sounds of battle as Pete's security team fought desperately to slow down the Vorthak advance. Pete Johnson and his remaining officers had fallen back to their final defensive position near the shelter entrances. Half of his team was already dead or wounded, and the rest were running low on ammunition. The Vorthak kept coming in endless waves, showing no concern for their own casualties. "How many rounds do you have left?" Pete called to Officer Janet Davis, who was firing her rifle from behind an overturned vehicle. "2 magazines," Janet replied. "Maybe 3 minutes of fighting at this rate." Pete looked around at his remaining people and made a hard decision. They had bought as much time as they could for the civilians, but continuing to fight here would only get them all killed without accomplishing anything. "Everyone fall back to the tunnels," Pete ordered. "We'll make our last stand underground." The security team retreated into the tunnel system, sealing the heavy blast doors behind them. The doors wouldn't stop the Vorthak for long, but they might buy a few more minutes for Jake and Lisa to get their distress signal out. In the mining complex, Lisa worked frantically to set up the quantum transmitter while Jake stood guard at the entrance. The equipment was old and simple compared to the colony's main communication systems, which meant it was still working despite the alien interference. "Almost got it," Lisa said, as she adjusted the transmitter's frequency. "I'm going to send everything. We know about these aliens and what happened to the colony. Maybe someone out there can use this information to stop them." She activated the transmitter and began broadcasting their emergency message into space. The signal was weak and would take time to reach any human receivers, but it was their only hope that someone would learn about the Vorthak attack on New Haven. As Lisa worked, Jake could hear the sounds of the Vorthak breaking through the blast doors in the tunnel system. The alien creatures were getting closer, and soon they would find the mining complex. "How much longer?" Jake asked. "Just a few more minutes," Lisa replied. "I want to include all the technical data about their ships and weapons. This information could save lives if anyone ever has to fight these things again." The Vorthak found them before Lisa could finish her transmission. The alien creatures burst into the mining complex with their weapons ready, but Lisa had managed to send most of her message. Somewhere in the galaxy, her distress signal was traveling through space, carrying the story of New Haven's destruction and the hope that humanity would someday have its revenge. Jake Morrison and Lisa Carter died, fighting, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Deep in the underground tunnels, nearly 300 colonists remained hidden in the deepest mining shafts, including Sarah Foster and her children. The Vorthak had taken control of New Haven's surface, but some humans had survived to bear witness to what had happened. The alien occupation of New Haven had begun, and the long nightmare of the surviving colonists was just starting. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the main colony building and watched the twin suns of Kepler 442c rise over the distant mountains. The orange and yellow light painted the sky in warm colors that reminded him of autumn back on Earth. He had been the colony administrator for 3 years now, and every morning he still felt amazed that humans had built a home so far from their birth world. New Haven stretched below him like a small city. The white dome buildings housed families, workshops, and laboratories. Green gardens grew under protective shields, and children played in the safe areas between the structures. Mining vehicles moved back and forth from the deep shafts that went down into the planet's crust. The colony was home to 2,147 people who had chosen to make this distant world their new life. Jake took a sip of his coffee and smiled as he watched a group of children chase each other around the playground near the education dome. Their laughter carried on the morning breeze, a sound that never failed to make him feel hopeful about humanity's future among the stars. These kids had been born here on New Haven, and this alien world was the only home they had ever known. Dr. Troer. Lisa Carter walked into the observation room carrying a datapad and a cup of coffee. She looked tired but excited. Lisa was the chief scientist who studied alien life forms, though they had not found any living creatures on this planet yet. She spent most of her days looking at rock samples and testing the soil for any signs of life. At 35 years old, she had already made several important discoveries about the geology of distant worlds. "Good morning, Jake," Lisa said as she joined him at the window. "The sunrise is beautiful today." "It always is," Jake replied. "How are your tests going?" Lisa frowned and looked at her datapad. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. We've been getting some strange readings from the deep mining areas. There's some kind of energy coming from way down below the surface." Jake turned to look at her. "Energy? What kind of energy?" "I don't know yet," Lisa said. "It's not like anything we've seen before. Tony Walsh and his geology team found it first when they were checking the mineral deposits in Shaft 7. Then Kate Phillips noticed that our long-range communication equipment has been acting strange lately." Jake felt a small worry start in his stomach. The colony depended on staying in contact with Earth and the other human settlements. If their communications were having problems, it could mean serious trouble for everyone living on New Haven. How strange, he asked. The signals are getting weaker every day, Lisa explained. Kate thinks something might be interfering with our transmissions. She's been trying to fix it for 2 weeks now, but the problem keeps getting worse. Yesterday she could barely reach the relay station that connects us to the other colonies. Jake nodded. I'll talk to Pete Johnson about increasing security patrols around the communication arrays. Maybe someone is tampering with them, though. I can't imagine who would want to do that out here. Pete Johnson was the colony's security chief. He had been a soldier in the Colonial Defense Force before coming to New Haven, and he took his job of protecting the colonists very seriously. Pete had only 12 security officers to cover the entire colony, but they did their best to keep everyone safe. Most of the time, their biggest problems were settling arguments between neighbors or dealing with equipment failures. Lisa sipped her coffee and looked out at the colony. Jake, do you ever think about how alone we are out here? What do you mean? Earth is so far away, she said. If something bad happened to us, it would take months for anyone to even know about it, and even longer for help to arrive. We're completely on our own out here in the middle of nowhere. Jake put his hand on her shoulder. Don't worry about that. We have good defenses, and Pete's team knows what they're doing. Besides, this sector of space has been quiet for years. No hostile alien species have been detected anywhere near here. The worst thing we've had to deal with was that dust storm last year. Down in the colony, children were walking to school in the education dome. Amy Foster, who was 8 years old, held her little brother Chris by the hand as they joined the other kids. Amy's parents worked in the mining operation, and she had been born right here on New Haven. This was the only home she had ever known, and she loved everything about it. Amy, wait up, called her best friend Jenny Martin as she ran to catch up with them. Jenny was 9 years old and had come to New Haven with her family when she was 6. She still remembered Earth a little bit, but New Haven felt more like home to her now. The 3 children walked together toward the school dome, talking about their plans for the weekend. They wanted to explore the rock formations near the eastern edge of the colony, where interesting crystals grew in the caves. Their parents had said they could go as long as they stayed within the safe zone marked by the security beacons. The school teacher, Mrs. Nancy Bell, greeted the children as they entered the dome. The walls were covered with pictures of Earth, animals and plants that the children had never seen in real life. They learned about their species' home world through books and videos, but to them, New Haven was home. Mrs. Bell had been teaching for 15 years and loved watching the children learn about the universe around them. Good morning, class, Mrs. Bell said as the children took their seats. Today we're going to learn about the different types of stars and how they affect the planets that orbit around them. Can anyone tell me what makes our 2 suns special? Amy raised her hand. They're both the right temperature to give us light and heat without being too hot or too cold. That's right, Amy, Mrs. Bell smiled. Our twin suns are what we call a stable binary system. They orbit around each other in a way that keeps our planet at just the right distance for human life. In the mining shafts, Tony Walsh and his team were working deep underground. The tunnels went down over a mile into the planet's crust where they extracted valuable minerals that would be shipped back to human space. Tony was a big man with strong arms from years of physical work, but today he felt uneasy about something he couldn't quite identify. The mining operation was the heart of New Haven's economy. The rare minerals they dug up were worth a fortune back in human space, and the profits helped pay for the colony's continued growth and expansion. Tony had been leading mining teams for 12 years, and he knew the sound and feel of normal mining operations better than anyone. Hey, Gary, Tony called to one of his workers. Are you getting those weird readings on your scanner too? Gary Cooper checked his equipment and nodded. Yeah, boss. The energy signatures are stronger today than yesterday. Whatever's down there, it's getting more active. My scanner is picking up some kind of pattern, like it's pulsing or something. Tony wiped sweat from his forehead. The deep tunnels were always hot, but today they seemed warmer than usual. The air felt thick and heavy, and there was a strange smell that he couldn't identify. It reminded him of electricity, but different somehow. Let's take some more samples and get back to the surface, Tony decided. I want Dr. Carter to look at these readings as soon as possible. Something about this doesn't feel right. The mining team packed up their equipment and headed for the elevator that would take them back to the surface. As they rode up through the shaft, Gary looked at his scanner one more time and frowned. The energy readings were even stronger now, and they seemed to be coming from multiple locations deep underground. Meanwhile, Kate Phillips was in the communication center trying to figure out why their long-range transmitters were failing. She was a skilled technician who had worked with communication systems for 10 years. But this problem was unlike anything she had seen before. The equipment was top of the line and had been working perfectly until recently. The signals to Earth were getting weaker every day. Yesterday, she could barely make contact with the relay station that passed messages between the colony and the homeworld. Today, she was getting almost nothing but static and broken fragments of transmissions. This doesn't make sense, Kate said to herself as she checked the equipment for the 100th time. All the hardware was working perfectly. The transmitters were generating full power, the antennas were properly aligned, and the receivers were functioning normally. The problem seemed to be coming from somewhere else, something that was blocking or interfering with their transmissions. She tried adjusting the frequency and boosting the power, but nothing helped. Whatever was causing the interference was getting stronger by the hour, and Kate was running out of ideas for how to fix it. She had sent a request for help to the other colonies in the sector, but so far she had not received any responses. Kate's assistant, a young man named Roy Stevens, entered the communication center carrying a cup of coffee and some technical manuals. Roy was fresh out of training and eager to learn everything he could about maintaining the colony's vital communication systems. "Any luck with the transmitters?" Roy asked as he set the coffee down next to Kate's workstation. "Nothing yet," Kate replied with frustration in her voice. "I've tried everything I can think of, but the interference keeps getting worse. It's like something is actively jamming our signals, but that doesn't make any sense. There's nobody else out here who would want to cut off our communications." Roy looked at the displays showing the signal strength and frequency analysis. Even with his limited experience, he could see that something was very wrong. The interference pattern was too regular to be natural, but too complex to be coming from their own equipment. As the day went on, life in New Haven continued as normal. Families ate lunch together in the community dining halls. Workers finished their morning shifts and prepared for the afternoon rotations. The hydroponic gardens produced fresh vegetables, and the water recycling systems kept everyone healthy and clean. The colony's medical center treated minor injuries and illnesses, while the workshops manufactured the tools and equipment needed to keep everything running smoothly. Dr. Lisa Carter spent the afternoon in her laboratory, studying the samples that Tony Walsh had brought up from the deep mining shafts. Under her microscope, she could see that the rock samples contained unusual crystalline structures that she had never encountered before. The crystals seemed to be naturally occurring, but they had properties that didn't match anything in her databases. When she ran electrical current through one of the crystal samples, it began to glow with a soft blue light and emit a low humming sound. The energy output was small but steady, and Lisa realized that these crystals might be some kind of natural power source. However, the energy readings that Tony's team had detected were much stronger than what these small samples could produce. There must be much larger deposits of these crystals deep underground, Lisa said to herself as she made notes in her research log. Maybe even huge formations that we haven't discovered yet. She decided to recommend that Jake authorize a deeper exploration mission to find the source of the energy readings. If there were large crystal formations down there, they could be incredibly valuable for the colony's power needs and for export back to human space. But deep in space, far beyond what human sensors could detect, something was watching New Haven with ancient and malevolent eyes. The Vorthak had found another human settlement, and they were preparing to add it to their long list of conquered worlds. Their massive bioships moved silently through the darkness between stars, getting closer to Kepler 442c with each passing hour. The alien vessels were unlike anything humans had ever built, looking more like giant living creatures than mechanical ships. Their hulls were made of organic materials that could heal themselves when damaged, and their weapons were biological systems that could adapt to different types of targets. Inside these ships, the Vorthak prepared their invasion forces and planned their attack on the unsuspecting human colony. The Vorthak had been hunting humans across the galaxy for decades, destroying colony after colony with ruthless efficiency. They saw humans as a threat to their ancient empire and were determined to eliminate every human settlement they could find. New Haven would be just another victory in their campaign of extermination. The humans of New Haven went to sleep that night not knowing that their peaceful life was about to end forever. In just a few hours, their world would change in ways they could never imagine, and they would learn that they were not alone in the galaxy. Unfortunately for them, they were about to discover that some neighbors were far from friendly, and that the universe could be a very dangerous place for those who were not prepared to fight for their survival.